Have you ever felt like you've just been waiting on something your whole life, forever and ever and ever and ever, and then finally one day it's time and you finally receive that thing? And how much joy there is and how much relief after this long period of not receiving that thing? Well, today we're going to be talking about that with Abraham, Isaac, and Sarah, his mother, in Genesis chapter 21. Hey guys, and welcome back to God's Word Made Simple by Simple Servant Ministries. My name is Aaron Hawk, and if this is your first time visiting with us, I just want to say welcome and thank you for joining us. God's Word Made Simple is an online discipleship ministry dedicated to taking God's Word and making it simple. We want to help you understand God's Word, apply it to your life, and grow in your relationship with the Lord. Also, make sure you hit that subscribe button and turn the bell notification to all so that you don't miss any future videos. We would love to have you as part of our family. Okay guys, let's get into the text. So chapter 21 verse 1 is where we're starting. Now, if you didn't catch it last week, make sure to go and watch the Genesis video from Genesis 28 through 18, I believe it was. Make sure to go watch that video. There's some important background there, as well as, honestly, just catch the whole Genesis series. If you haven't caught it, start in Genesis 1, work your way up. But right now we are in Genesis chapter 21, and we're going to be starting with finally the promised son, Isaac, being born to Abraham and Sarah. This promise had spanned many years. Abraham and Sarah had been waiting a long time. Estimates are roughly 25 to 30 years on average for how long they had been waiting for Isaac after the promise. If Abraham was roughly 70 years old when the promise was given, and then roughly 100 years old when Isaac was born or conceived, that would be roughly 25 to 30 years. Now, remember, the Bible tends to ballpark ages and numbers in the Old Testament especially, so we can get specific. It just takes more scholarly work, and for the sake of an estimate, 25 to 30 years that they have been waiting on this promise. So if you feel like God has been holding out on you on a promise, one, is that really a promise that God gave? Because a lot of times when people say God has promised something, that's a subjective desire they want, not something God has actually promised. Second, you probably haven't waited 25 years. So, you're in good company if you are waiting on the Lord for something in your life. So let's get started in verse 1 of chapter 21. And again, bear in mind the context of the previous section where the Lord had closed up the wombs of Abimelech's kingdom, right? And now God is about to bless Sarah, finally, from our perspective. All in God's perfect timing from God's perspective. Then the Lord took note of Sarah as he had said, and the Lord did for Sarah as he had promised. So God is not slack, he has not forgotten, he just has his own timeline, and we don't always understand it. In fact, I would say often don't understand it. So Sarah conceived and bore a son to Abraham in his old age, at the appointed time of which God had spoken to him. So remember earlier in one of our previous sections, God had promised about this time next year at the overthrow of Sodom and Gomorrah. So there's been roughly a year that has passed since then. That was the appointed time that God had promised specifically to Abraham. Abraham called the name of his son who was born to him, whom Sarah bore. Now, notice how much effort is being put in here to emphasize that God provided, and this is a son with Abraham and Sarah. Because remember earlier, Abraham and Sarah tried to fix the problem themselves. God took too long, and they had another son, and now we're here, right? So specifically pointing out that it was Abraham and Sarah. So Sarah conceived and bore a son to Abraham in his old age at the appointed time which God had spoken to him. Abraham called the name of his son who was born to him, whom Sarah bore to him Isaac. Now remember, Isaac's name, well, I'll get into this in a minute. So then Abraham circumcised his son Isaac. Now remember, circumcision was commanded back in Genesis chapter 17. So on the 8th day, so if you want to know why the 8th day was in Jewish tradition, the day that infants were circumcised, that's why. Okay, so Abraham circumcised his son Isaac when he was 8 days old. Did I say years a second ago? Hopefully I said days. If I said years, I meant days. When he was 8 days old, as God had commanded him. Now Abraham was 100 years old when his son Isaac was born to him. Sarah said, God has made laughter for me. Now, this time it is joyful laughter. So remember back in Genesis 17:12. Well, originally Genesis 17:19. I'll put a card to that video from that section up here right now. So Genesis 17:19 was when God originally told Abraham about Isaac specifically, and Abraham laughed. Then in Genesis 18:12 is where Sarah laughed. So I'll put the card up here for that section. Those are two great videos that provide some background on this. But then Sarah laughed in a scoffing tone, right? Yeah, right, I'm old, like I'm going to have a child now, Aaron paraphrase, right? Now Sarah is laughing a totally different kind of laughter. And by the way, that's what Isaac's name means, is laughter, or he laughs, right? Sarah said, God has made laughter for me. So this is a pun, a play on words, right? He has made this child who is now named He Laughs, but also he is making me laugh at the absurdity and the blessing of receiving this child at this time in our life. See, God has a sense of humor. So God has made laughter for me. Everyone who hears will laugh with me. Now remember, previously she was laughing at herself. She was embarrassed. People are mocking her, right? The handmaiden even mocked her. There was some tension there, right? So now she's saying that people will laugh with her. See, now that the promise has come, there is joy. Now we can look at this and laugh, but during the struggle, it's hard to have joy during those times, but remember, that's actually happiness. Joy is a result of your position. Happiness is a result of your circumstances. Okay? So God has made laughter for me. Everyone who hears will laugh with me. And we do kind of, even to this day, kind of have to laugh at this, right? I do anyway. It's funny. God has a sense of humor. And she said, who would have said to Abraham that Sarah would nurse children? I mean, can you imagine being her age and nursing a baby still, right? I'm trying to remember how old Sarah was. So I believe Sarah was roughly 90 years old, and now she has given birth to a child. And remember, the Bible already told us she'd already gone through menopause. She's 90 years old, she gives birth to a child, and she's nursing. If that's not a miracle, I don't know what is, right? I can't even say that without smiling and laughing some. Can you imagine 90 years old? Most of us would consider ourselves lucky or to have lived a long time to make it to 90, much less now you're raising a child and all that. The biology behind that is just amazing. Okay, so who would have said to Abraham that Sarah would nurse children? Yet I have borne him a son in his old age. Now Sarah feels vindicated, but her identity never should have been in having a child. And hopefully she fixed that as time went on, right? I also want to point out a couple of things. People lived a lot longer during this time period than we do today. Okay, if you go back and look at the age that people lived, they lived a lot longer. What's also amazing, though, is that Sarah was still so beautiful that a king a year earlier, a year earlier was Sodom and Gomorrah. So less than a year earlier, this king took Sarah to be his wife. So some people try to say, well, you know, in the Old Testament, they didn't count years the same that we do. So when it says that Sarah was 90 years old, she really wasn't 90 by today's standards. That was just a different way of counting age. No, that's not true. She was 90 years old. 1, people lived longer. 2, she had already gone through menopause. 3, the king still thought she was hot enough, he wanted her for a wife. Dude, I don't care how beautiful a woman is for 90 years old. You can't take a young king and say that he wants a 90-year-old for his wife and that make any sense. So the bottom line is that people lived longer during this time period. Now, that is not the point of this video, but I have to point that out while we're talking about all of this. So verse 8, the child grew and was weaned, and Abraham made a great feast on the day that Isaac was weaned. See, now, at long last, the promise has been, pun not intended, delivered. Can't help but laugh at that one. I didn't mean to go there, but it works, right? I mean, at long last, this promised child is here in the flesh and has lived through the weaning. That means through the most dangerous portions of an infant's life, especially during this time period. So that promise is now secure from Abraham's perspective. What a relief. What are some things that you have found relief in after going through a long period of suffering and then finally you get relief? Share that with me in the comments. I would love to share in your joys. And if you're going through a struggle right now, let me know in the comments, because struggling and the relief that comes and the joy that comes from that struggle ending and receiving something in the end, that's real, guys. And that's part of discipleship, is we don't just read the Bible to educate our heads. We read the Bible so that it changes our heart. And remember, I've talked before about prayer. And we need to make sure that we are praying before we read. Remember, I always pray off camera. I record several videos at a time and then upload them as time goes on. So I always pray off camera. But when you're praying devotionally, when you're reading your devotion, you need to be praying that God would work in your heart and your mind, that He would change you, that He would mold your heart to reflect Him. So when we're reading and praying, let's be real about the struggles that we're going through, and then share them if you want to with me. I'll be happy to pray with you and to encourage you. Guys, again, if you appreciate this, make sure to hit like, hit that subscribe button, bell to all, so that you don't miss any future videos. Guys, I'd love to have you as part of our family, and I'm glad that you're here with us hanging out to the end of this video. Guys, thank you very much, and God bless.